You say things you shouldn't have said. So there's intentionality written all over this. What kind of sacrifice is there for intentional sin? Yes?
I don't know if this is correct, but it possibly has to be something that's really going to make a difference in your life and that you will remember. Something but that intensity, blood obviously, but it has to be something that really is going to cost you something.
Yeah, but I'm saying, what is the remedy? What's the sacrificial remedy for an intentional sin? There is none. None listed.
Sacrifice was never the remedy.
I agree. So we're getting to that. Here's the question. Here's the question. Here's the question. Could any sacrifice ever atone for a person's sin? Could any sacrifice ever atone for a person's sin?
Christ.
Well, yeah, agree. But could any?
You still have to repent. Even his sacrifice is meaningless without the repentance.
I agree. I absolutely agree. Here's my point. As you look at Leviticus, the issue is not the sacrifices. First of all, three out of the 5 are voluntary. The first one, Olah, voluntary. Second one, Mincha, grain offering, voluntary. Third one, voluntary. Shmika is putting your hand. So the third one is the Shalomim, peace offering. Fourth one, now the fourth one, not voluntary. The Katat offering, which splits off into being an impurity offering, depending on the category, and then the Asham, the guilt offering. Those two are mandatory. But here's the thing: the sacrifices did not atone for a person's sin. Remember, what does atone for a person's sin is this: when a person confesses their sin, they confess their sin. There is no, what we would call, compound rebellion. There is the sin of what's called Biyad Ramah. Biyad Ramah, the sin of the high hand. Right? That's defiance. However, there can be intentional sin without any compound rebellion. As soon as you realize you've sinned, you go, I've sinned. I have sinned. What's the remedy? But it was intentional. So, could these sacrifices bring any remedy? If the sacrifices could bring remedy, we'd just still be doing them. What brought remedy was this. And here's where our difficulty lies. We're bound by time and space, so we think in terms of time and space. The only remedy ever for sin, the only blood sacrifice remedy ever for sin was Yeshua the Messiah. No matter what side of the cross you were on, it doesn't matter. It was always his and his alone. Now, what he wanted you to do with the sacrifices, why then bring the sacrifices? Here was the reason. It allowed for the person who was truly repentant to demonstrate obedience after the fact. You came in and you saw the life of an innocent ebb away as the blood was taken from them, because the life of the flesh is in the blood. Leviticus 17:11. Blood is a life fluid. You laid your hands on this animal, confessed your sins over it, and then you watched as a priest slit its throat and raised its legs, and you watched the blood drain out. And you knew an innocent life was destroyed because of my sin, because of what I did. And so you were being obedient to what God had said to do. But the shedding of that blood didn't cause you to be atoned for. What caused you to be atoned for, ultimately, whether you're on this side of the cross or the other side of the cross, all of it was because of the blood of Messiah Yeshua. It had nothing to do with these animals. If the blood of bulls and goats could be atoning for us, I'm not sending my son if a blooded bull will continue to do the work. Yeah.
I see many people, and maybe I misread this, but prior to the tabernacle or the temple, it says they built an altar to the Lord and offered sacrifices.
Right.
Why do we not do that?
Well, because the book of Deuteronomy says that once the tabernacle is built, that from that point forward, once the tabernacle is established, that becomes the only place. You're right. You see Abraham and you see Noah and others offering sacrifices at altars at different places prior to the book of Deuteronomy, where he finally says, I have placed my name there, and from here on out, no liturgical sacrifice can ever happen here. We can do, even if you do want meat, for your food. You still have to, when you slaughter that animal, even though you're not slaughtering it for the altar, you still have to cut the throat, make it as quick as possible, hike the legs, and drain the blood. Because all the blood has to go back to God as a way of saying, life comes from you, I will not take life. I'm giving the life back to you, I'm pouring it back into the ground, even if you're just taking that animal to eat for yourself. Now, when you bring it into the tabernacle, obviously the blood is going to be sprinkled on the altar, poured on the altar. So, no matter what, the blood has to go back to God.
Okay, I don't want to sound like a serpent in the garden here, but did God say that because the tabernacle hadn't yet been established, Abraham, those guys that were doing that thing, that was okay to build the altar and sacrifice? Does it say that we can't now, because we no longer have a tabernacle or a temple, that we can't erect altars and do that?
Deuteronomy says that the way it reads is that from that time forward, sacrifices would be done in the tabernacle, and we know that they were then done in the temple, and we're not given any permission to move outside the tabernacle or the temple. Once, even in the first century, when we have Yeshua on this earth, we have a tabernacle still standing, and they're going to the tabernacle and still doing sacrifices. Nobody was ever given permission outside of the tabernacle or the temple once those were established to say you can go back to doing what Abraham did, what Noah did, and do it yourself.
So there's no way to read into that because the temple and tabernacle there at that time, that now that they're no longer there, that we can't do it ourselves again as Abraham did.
You have to read into it to do that.
You do?
Yeah, you would. You would have to say, and by the way, I got some brothers and sisters. Bless their hearts. I love them. I do. I want to say that. I love them. But they're out there on Passover, and they want to slaughter a lamb for Passover as a way of saying, we're commemorating this. To me, if you're going to liturgically slaughter an animal, you have to have a priest do it. It has to be in the tabernacle. I understand their sentiment, and I resonate with their desire to be obedient to God, and I understand, all of that. I just fundamentally disagree with them because it's not a temple. This is America. There's no priest doing it. We're not, it's not being thrown on an altar. As far as I'm concerned, as I'm looking at the text, in the first century, while Yeshua is here on this earth, the temple still stands, and sacrifices are still being offered there, and that seems to be the only legitimate place to offer them.
Well, even prophetic reference to Jerusalem, right?
Yeah.
Like Revelation and
Yes.
all that.
You had a question, sorry.
Was Shiloh considered a part of Jerusalem, or how would that fit? Because you get into 1 Samuel, and it says that year after year, Elkanah would travel to Shiloh to worship and sacrifice.
Yeah.
That was not the tabernacle.
By the way, but there's... okay, so what book?
I
don't know. I know what book was that. What book is that?
Samuel.
Thank you. And here's what's interesting about Samuel. Samuel's doing some interesting things that are kind of odd. I'll give you an example. He's sleeping in the most holy place, on the holy place, which is kind of, okay, what's going on there? I'm not convinced that everything that's happening in Samuel is legit. Maybe God's allowing for it, but you're kind of going, this is not good protocol. So I don't know what to make of Shiloh. It's an interesting scenario, and God allows for it. Now, here's what's interesting. Here's to show you how things work. This goes. You have the split: Saul, David, Solomon, and then we have the split: Southern Kingdom, Northern Kingdom. The Northern Kingdom had a problem. The Northern Kingdom had a problem. The tabernacle, actually the temple, is in the Southern Kingdom. So if you're going to offer sacrifices, what do? Because all your Northern Kingdom people are going to have to go down to Jerusalem in order to offer a sacrifice, if you're going to do it legit. So here's what the king does. The first king of the Northern Kingdom says, this is not going to work, having all my people traipse down to Jerusalem like they're supposed to, like they're commanded to, in order to offer the sacrifices. We need to have something here in the Northern Kingdom. So he sets up 2 places in the Northern Kingdom where they do sacrifices. And he does something else that's quite interesting. He says, we're going to move the holy days 1 month later. We're going to just move everything back 1 month. Okay? Because he realizes if they're all going to try to celebrate the same festival, and they're all going to go down to Jerusalem to do it, this creates a problem with my Northern Kingdom people wanting to go all down to the Southern Kingdom. I don't want that to happen. So he sets up altars in the Northern Kingdom. They're never considered legitimate. And he moves the holy days all back a month.
All of them?
Yes.
I didn't realize all of them.
He bumps them all back. And here's where he got that idea. Here's where he got that idea. He's reading his text. He's reading his text in this regard. For the festival of Pesach, and for that festival only, now you could extrapolate the others if you wanted to. For the festival of Passover, according to Numbers chapter 9, if a person was impure or was on a trip and they couldn't celebrate Pesach at its regular time at Nisan, 1 month later you could celebrate it. Pesach Sheni. But you have to go through the same, you have to do everything the same 1 month later. So he's looking at this and going, 1 month later, huh? Good idea. It's got some biblical basis to it. I'll push it back 1 month, push it forward 1 month, and everything will be kosher. And we can even make it sound biblical because it's allowed for with Passover. So we'll just do it with all of them. Okay? Now, here's the key. Here's the interesting thing. Go with me to Acts chapter 21. Acts chapter 21. Hold your finger at Acts chapter 21. Hold it there and go with me to Numbers chapter 6. Numbers chapter 6. You need to see this. Numbers chapter 6. Starting verse. Let's start in verse. It would be good if I got to chapter 6. Here we go. Verse 13. Verse 13. Numbers chapter 6, verse 13. This is the background. It says, now this is the law of the Nazarite. When the days of his separation are fulfilled, he shall be brought to the door of the tabernacle of meeting, and he shall present his offering to the Lord, one male lamb in his first year without blemish as a burnt offering, olah. One ewe lamb in his first year without blemish as a sin offering, a katat, or a purification offering. One ram without blemish as a shalamim, a peace offering. Then a basket of unleavened bread, cakes of fine flour mixed with oil, unleavened wafers anointed with oil, and their grain offering, and their drink offering. So this is a person bringing a minkat. So you have a shalamim, a katat, an olah, and a minkat. This is considered the mega sacrifice. If you want to be in a Nazarite vow, because there are two types of Nazarites. In the Torah itself, or in the Tanakh itself, we only have mentioned one type, the lifetime Nazarite. Okay, lifetime Nazarite. However, we know from history that there were short-term Nazarites. You could enter into a Nazarite vow. The Nazarite vow allowed for a person who was not a Kohanim to live in a Kohanim status for a period of time, to live as if they were in a priestly status. By the way, it's this kind of Torah thinking that you get the Qumran people saying, hey, if the Nazarite vow could have us live in a priestly status for a little while, why don't we all try to live in this priestly status? And by the way, the Pharisees started thinking this way too. If the priests have to wash their hands and their feet every day, we should all do an immersion every day. So you can see how the thinking gets started. Yes?
That's where the kibbutz comes from partly, isn't it?
Somewhat, yes. Partly, yes. Now, look at Acts chapter 21. Look at Acts chapter 21. Verse 26. Then Paul took them in, and the next day, having been purified with them, entered the temple to announce the expiration of the days of purification, at which time an offering should be made for each one of them. So Paul is asked to do and pay for the 4 individuals to complete their Nazarite vow. Go back with me to verse 17. Verse 17 of Acts 21. It says this, and when he had come to Jerusalem, the brethren received us gladly, On the following day, Paul went in with us to Yaakov, and all the elders were present. When he had greeted them, he told in detail those things which God had done among the Gentiles through his ministry. And when they heard it, they glorified the Lord. And they said to him, "You see, brothers, how many myriads of Jews there are who have believed, and they are all zealous for the Torah." Not a problem. But they have been informed about you that you teach all the Jews who are among the Gentiles to forsake Moses, to forsake Torah, saying that they ought not to circumcise their children, nor to walk according to the customs. What then? The assembly must certainly meet, for they will hear that you have come. Therefore do what we tell you. We have 4 men who have taken a vow. That's the Nazirite vow, Numbers chapter 6. He says, "Take them and be purified with them, and pay their expenses, so that they may shave their heads, and that all may know that those things of which they were informed concerning you are nothing." And he does. Paul helps 4 individuals pay their Nazirite vow, which includes all these different sacrifices that we just listed out in Numbers chapter 6. So the temple is still standing. The sacrifices are still going. Paul is still helping those who are in a Nazirite vow. Yeshua is deceased, resurrected, and ascended, and they're still offering sacrifices at the temple. Yeah.
What is a Zebach?
Zavak is a sacrifice. Zavak means sacrifice. Slaughter, sacrifice.
Than the other ones, because it comes in
Well,
reference to a ram.
Zavak, they'll say Zavak Shalomim, for instance, was a peace sacrifice. So they'll use the word Zavak because that's the word for slaughter. It goes along with it. The word Zavak means the altar is called a Mizbeach. The altar itself, where the slaughtering animal is placed, Mizbeach. So Zavak means the slaughter, Mizbeach, altar, the place of the slaughter. Yes.
So the fact that we're not sacrificing, I mean, they sacrificed after Yeshua went to the cross often, and then they were still sacrificing there. So should we still be sacrificing?
That was his question. My answer is no. Although, let me say this. If the temple were to be reinstated, if the temple were to have Kohanim operating, if the temple were to be cleansed and those who come into it have the ashes of the red heifer sprinkled over them to purify them of corpse defilement, yes, once the temple, this is what the prophets foretell. The prophets foretell that one day the temple will be rebuilt, and once the temple is rebuilt, sacrifices will once again resume. But understand something. That does not in any way diminish the sacrifice of Yeshua, because it was his sacrifice and his sacrifice only. These were and only have been a picture and a means of obedience. The blood of the bull and the goat never brought any kind of atonement. They simply allowed for the person to demonstrate obedience and to see the picture of an innocent dying for the guilty.
Okay, and please forgive me.
No, it's okay.
So basically, because we don't do it because of the fact that the temple is not in existence
Correct.
at this point. So, because I only asked this, somebody asked me this question yesterday, and I said, well, I don't even know if really God specifically said that we're not supposed to do it. However, I'll find out for sure. So the fact that we're not doing it, and we use the excuse for the temple not here, God's okay with that?
Yes, because what do? I mean, we don't have a temple.
Okay.
And the temple was destroyed in 70 AD.
And that's the only place they do.
And that's the only place they did the sacrifices. You weren't allowed to, once the temple is destroyed, you can't have another person setting themselves up and saying, you know what, I'm going to start a high place over here, and I'm going to start, or a shrine or an altar over here, I'm going to start doing my own sacrifice. And by the way, you guys want to come join me? We can all just join in and have our own little thing. No, that doesn't, he doesn't allow for that. Hold on. First, Larry, go ahead.
Yeah, wasn't it a problem also for those Jews who were sent to exile? They couldn't go to the temple and make sacrifices.
Exactly. That's a perfect example. The Jews in exile could not go to the temple and offer sacrifices. They weren't allowed to. If they're in exile, away from the temple, you just don't offer them. Now, once you go back, what do? You rebuild the temple and you commence doing the sacrifices.
So when the temple is rebuilt.
When the temple is rebuilt, we will be doing them again. This is why we have to continue to study this, because now I've got some of my brothers and sisters. Now, let's go the other side. I got some of my brothers and sisters in the evangelical community. They think that the sacrifices actually atone for people in the Old Testament. Here's what they say. Here's their bifurcation. They say, these people over here in the Old Testament, they were atoned for by the sacrifices. And we, on the other side, post-cross, we're sanctified and atoned for by the shed blood of Christ. So now that Christ has come, there's no longer any need for sacrifices. The sacrifices will no longer exist. They're no longer. The problem you end up with is this: the prophets say to us that once, and it seems in texts that are talking about the future coming of Christ, or the future reign of Christ, that there's going to be these sacrifices. So that because the sacrifices aren't a problem, the sacrifices are not the issue. It's the heart of the people. And the sacrifices never atoned anyway. They were always a picture.
So that's a whole misunderstanding.
It's a whole misunderstanding of what the role of the sacrifices were to begin with. Yeah, you had a question.
The Samaritans, don't they sacrifice on a completely different mountain?
Yes, Mount Gerizim.
When Yeshua comes to the Samaritan woman and she says, "We worship on a different mountain," what do you think of this? Why doesn't he correct her on that?
He does actually. He says, one day it won't matter. It'll all have to be in Jerusalem on the temple now. And I think that's what he's saying to her. I take it, he's trying to move past the issues of Samaritan versus Israeli, but bottom line is this: salvation is from the Jews, and you're going to have to come to the temple in order to offer these sacrifices. Yes.
I was looking at the sacrifice of the first Passover, and that was given before the law was given after they left Egypt. That wasn't a literal sacrifice of the lamb.
Correct.
And I don't know exactly where it was, but I think I read after they went out of Egypt, it was now a memorial to you forever.
Yes.
So going from a sacrifice, a physical sacrifice to a memorial, that would, but you still had to keep a memorial.
Yes.
And the reason I say this is if our calendars are patterned up with his calendar, the first 7 days, the first 6 days of his work, we were created on the 6th day, and 7th day he took a break. Okay, now we're on the 2nd week, and the Father's getting ready to take his 2nd Sabbath since we've been created. This also pulls into place, that's the Father's first month, and it puts his 14th day as a memorial for his Sabbath.
Okay. Yeah, and even when you were going to do your sacrifice for Passover, you had to bring it to the temple.
Right.
First century, tabernacle or temple. This is what they're doing with Yeshua. So yeah, you have to bring it to the tabernacle in order to slaughter this animal. You don't just slaughter it anywhere you want to.
Or I guess my question was, after the first slaughter, was there any more slaughtering of the animals after the Passover? Because
that first year, after that first year, they had the tabernacle.
If it went into a memorial.
Well, it goes to a memorial, but yes, it goes to a memorial, but the actual slaughter of the animals from after that first Passover was done at the tabernacle. The tabernacle was completed before the next cycle of Passover.
Okay.
So they offered it in, they had to bring it to
all the way to the side.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So you have to bring it there. Now, here's the thing. Okay, so we have the first, this brings up the question. Why did Yeshua need to be sacrificed? Here's the $1 million question. Okay, so let's go back to Adam. Adam sins. Adam tries to cover himself with fig leaves, right, or leaves. I think the text says fig leaves, doesn't it?
I think it just says leaves.
So say fig leaves or say leaves? Okay. So he tries to cover himself with leaves. Yahweh comes along and says, no, that won't work. We're going to have to cover you with skins. Animal will have to be shed. Some animal gave its life, and he covers Adam with skins. All right. So if we are in Adam, all of us sin. And because of sin, we have death. That means we as image bearers go into the ground, and no longer do we reflect the image of God because our death brings about destruction to the image of God. We are raised, we are supposed to be image bearers. But we die because we participated in the rebellion. We had autonomy and choice, and we said, we will do what we want to do. We will go our own way. God says, I'll give you the Torah to tell you the direction I want you to go. And even when we had the Torah, the children of Israel still went the direction that they wanted to go. Thus, he says, at the end of Leviticus, at the end of Deuteronomy, here's what's going to happen when you guys mess up. Paraphrasing. This is what the kind of stuff that's going to happen. You're going to end up in exile, and I'm going to kick you out of the land just like I kicked the Canaanites out. If you're going to do the same nonsense the Canaanites did, you're going to leave just like they did. And when you're ready to obey me, then you can come back. And what do the prophets do? The prophets say repeatedly to Israel, please stop sinning, stop going away from God, and come back to Him. If you'll do teshuvah and come back, He will bring you back into your land. He'll bring you back, but you gotta be obedient to Him. But we continually go away from Him. This is our inclination. Our inclination, left to ourselves, is to move away from Him without the regenerative work of the Holy Spirit. Now, we're in Adam, and we're going to die. Everybody here is terminal. We're all going to die. That's the bad news. You have Israel, which is the mechanism by which He's going to bring about the Messiah. Out of Israel will come this new Adam, a new man. And this new man will be both God and man. That's the key. He's going to start a whole new people group. And He is going to go through death, and He is going to come out the other side. And when He comes out the other side, He gives us life in Him, because we are in Him. Without Him, everyone would stay dead. Everyone would just die, and that's where they would be. There would be no resurrection. But He goes into death, comes out the other side, and gives life to a race of people that are now in Him. As we were once in Adam and died, we are now in Messiah and have the ability, because of His work, to live. He atones for us. It's His life given for us that allows us to then live in Him. Because if He doesn't resurrect us, there's nobody coming back. And what does Martha say? Martha says, Yeshua comes to the tomb. She says, Martha, do you believe in the resurrection? And she says, of course, Lord, I believe in the resurrection. And He says, I am the resurrection and the life. If you believe in me, there will be resurrection. And to show you that that's possible, watch what's going to happen here. I'm going to call your brother back to life. He's been